Let's discuss now about the long term with our Toric implantation with Oliver Findel, our secretary.
Thank you very much. When I heard I have to give this talk, I wasn't too happy, I do admit. These are my financial disclosures. What are the sources of having error after toric lenses? Obviously, one is if the corneal measurements before surgery are not perfect, and they are not perfect. So if you have a difference between different techniques of measurement, for example, topography, keratometry, you tend to have poorer outcomes after surgery. But that's obviously, like, say, a short-term cause. The long-term one would be rotation of the lens after surgery. And here you can see a nice study from 2017 by Inoue. He looked at 72 eyes of 51 patients, in this case with a Tecnis one-piece toric IOL. And he did measurements right at the end of surgery and then took photographs at 1 hour, 1 day, and so on. And what you can see is that there's a lot of rotation in the very early, essentially 1 hour after surgery, and then also until day 1. So most of the rotation happens in that very short time, and thereafter it seems to be quite stable. They hypothesized that what you should do is you should wait for haptic extension during surgery, obviously complete removal of OVD, maintain AC stability, and also suggested that you may want to rest the patient for this first hour in order to have less rotation. It probably also is quite clear that bag size may be critical, so especially if you have a patient with a big capsule bag. So here a study which is about 20 years old where we looked at capsular bag size. We did that with using a capsular tension ring and then doing gonioscopy on day 1 after surgery, looking at the ends of the ring and the distance between them, and therefore knowing the capsular bag size. And then we tried to correlate that, for example, with axial length. And you can see the correlation is okay in this region of normal eyes, but actually scatters a lot for the long eyes. And you can see also with corneal power there is some correlation. We saw a few years, in 2015, we did a study where we actually used high-resolution 5 Tesla MRI to try to, again, predict capsular bag and capsule size. And what you can see here is that the prediction is actually pretty good if you use the factors globe diameter, axial length, age, and lens thickness. Now, it's quite obvious we're not going to be using this on a routine basis for patients because 5 Tesla MRI is obviously quite exaggerated. But just to show there is some kind of correlation, that you can have some prediction, but there's still noise. So what actually happens after surgery in these first few days and weeks? So here you can see for different lenses, let's concentrate on, in this case, the single-piece lens. This is the anterior capsule coming down onto the IOL optic, and you can see on average it takes about 7 to 14 days, and essentially in nearly all cases the capsule is already in contact with the lens. This obviously depends on IOL and haptic design, no question. And what you can see here is the actual fusion of the anterior and posterior capsule next to the IOL optic, so the fusion of the capsule bag. And that typically on average takes 10 to 15 days with most of these IOLs. So until then, we still tend to have an open bag, even though rotation is less likely. The question is always, when can you be sure that things are good? This is a trial where we were very sort of shocked, let me say, because this was a lens which is quite typical open loop acrylic lens, and you can see 2/3 of the patient actually had little to no rotation, but 1/3 showed a lot of rotation, on average 30 degrees, always against clockwise, so anti-clockwise. And you can see within the 1 hour to 1 week, so the first week, there was essentially no rotation, just one single case, but the rotation happened with a delay later. And if you have a look at these images, you can see here the rotation 1 week, 3 months, no rotation, but then rotation. You can also see this asymmetric fibrosis of the capsule at the haptic-optic junction, inducing that rotation. Here the rotation happened a little earlier, between 1 week and 3 months, and then stayed stable thereafter. So it means in some cases with special lenses, which you may not know well, they may actually rotate quite late during capsular bag fibrosis, which is rare, but again, was surprising to us in this case as well. Let's have a look at long-term rotational stability. These are several papers with different IOLs, and you can see these are 12 to 24 months, and you can see that on average, rotation is quite low. There's only one study with a slightly higher rotation. I believe that if you have rotation after 6 months, it's probably more due to actual measurement noise and probably is not real rotation, because typically then the capsule is already fibrosed and you wouldn't expect any more rotation. Here, looking at the long-term visual acuities, you can see the best corrected visual acuities are very good in all these studies. The uncorrected visual acuities are not that great. This may also be, of course, because of some undercorrection or maybe some slight rotation not giving you complete correction. The question now really is, what do we do if we have a young patient in the 40s and 50s and we want to give a toric lens? We know that astigmatism changes over time. Do we have to take that into account if we really want to have good long-term results? So this is a nice study from 2017 from Shao, and it is a cross-sectional study with more than 3,700 eyes using Scheimpflug. And what you can see is from 18 years on up to, in this case, nearly 90, you can see the differences in here now total corneal astigmatism. And you can see there are essentially two turning points, especially between 36 to 69. They found quite a strong change, and you'll see that in a second, for against the rule astigmatism. Before and after, it seems to be quite constant. So here you can see the actual change. I showed you the total change just now, and you can see it's really due to the change of the anterior with the rule astigmatism decreasing from 94% at 18 down to 22 at 70. And that is really because of an anterior corneal astigmatism change. The posterior corneal astigmatism actually stays very constant. And they think that it's because of reduction in eyelid tension. So we can see a very clear tendency towards against the rule astigmatism, especially in that age group. And here also 4 other studies which found also quite similar rates of towards against the rule astigmatism over 10 years in the range of 0.3, a little more diopters every 10 years. So they conclude that we should, in general, measure total K using tomography if possible, and if the patients are in their 40s or early 50s, we should undercorrect with the rule astigmatism and should fully correct or maybe even slightly overcorrect against the rule astigmatism in order to have good long-term results. So to conclude, long-term success of toric IOLs depends on rotational stability. You saw that IOL rotation happens mostly within the first hours after surgery, probably especially in large bags. It's less likely once the capsules have fused, and late rotation is rare, but can happen, as you saw in that one case of that one lens with asymmetric fibrosis, and that of course will depend on the haptics and also the material. If you use toric IOLs in younger patients or in a refractive lens exchange setting, so let's say in the 40s or early 50s, you should undercorrect with the rule astigmatism and fully correct or maybe even slightly overcorrect against the rule astigmatism. Thank you very much.